I never thought I'd be the guy standing in a grocery store, holding a bottle of wine in one hand and a carton of eggs in the other, while my entire marriage fell apart right in front of me. But that's exactly where I was when it happened. It was a regular Thursday evening, nothing out of the ordinary. Laura had texted me earlier in the day, asking me to pick up a few things on my way home. Red wine, eggs, and some of that fancy bread you like, she wrote. The message was casual, normal, like any other day. But as I stood in the checkout line, I heard something that made my blood freeze in my veins. Two women, standing in front of me, chatting away as they waited to pay. I wasn't paying attention at first, just staring at the conveyor belt, lost in my own thoughts. But then one of them laughed, a short, knowing kind of laugh, and said, "I still can't believe she's doing this. Like, how does her husband not know?" The other woman chuckled. Men are idiots. They never suspect a thing. I didn't think much of it at first. I didn't even glance up from my phone. But then, as the cashier scanned their items, the first woman said something that sent a bolt of ice through my spine. She even brought him to that little cabin outside of town. Can you imagine? The one she and her husband used to go to for their anniversaries. I looked up. My heart started pounding. I don't know why. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe it was something deeper, something primal that told me I needed to listen. The second woman sighed dramatically, tossing a pack of gum onto the conveyor belt. "Well, at least she's keeping it exciting," she said. "Sneaking off in the middle of the day like that? She's got some nerve." I wasn't breathing. My hands clenched around the bottle of wine so tightly I thought it might shatter. There was no reason for me to assume they were talking about Laura. None. But my gut told me otherwise. Because our anniversary cabin? The one we hadn't visited in almost 2 years? She had mentioned it. Just last week. I remember it clearly now. We were sitting at dinner, or picking at her salad, me scrolling through my phone. She had sighed, looking wistful, and said, "We should go back to the cabin sometime. I miss it." I had smiled at her, said something like, "Yeah, that'd be nice." And that was the end of it. Or so I thought. I paid for my things in a daze, barely hearing the cashier as he muttered something about the total. My mind was racing. There was no proof. There was no reason to jump to conclusions. But something inside me already knew the truth. Laura was cheating on me, and she was taking him to our cabin. I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The bag of groceries sat in the passenger seat, the wine bottle rolling slightly whenever I shifted. My heart was still hammering from what I had overheard. There was no proof, no evidence, nothing but a gut feeling and a few words spoken by two strangers. But it was enough. The doubt had already sunk its claws into me, and there was no shaking it. I unlocked my phone and pulled up my messages with Laura. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't know what to say. I could just ask her. Straight up. No games, no accusations, just a simple, "Have you been going to the cabin?" But I knew how that conversation would go before I even started it. She'd act confused, maybe even offended, and I'd look like a paranoid idiot. If she was cheating, she wasn't going to just admit it because I asked. I tossed my phone onto the seat and started the engine, but I didn't drive home. Instead, I sat there, running through the possibilities in my head. If she was meeting someone, she had to be careful. She wouldn't use her phone, at least not in a way that left evidence. She was too smart for that. But people get sloppy, even the careful ones. I exhaled sharply and reached for my phone again. If she was going to the cabin, there had to be some sign of it. The last time we went, I had set up an online reservation system through the rental site we used when we weren't there. It wasn't booked often, just the occasional weekend getaway for tourists, but if she had been there recently, there'd be a record of it. I logged into the account and scrolled through the past month's reservations. My stomach dropped the second I saw it. The cabin had been reserved last week, and again 3 days ago. Both bookings were under the same name. Not Laura's. Someone named Adam Foster. I swallowed hard, staring at the name. It could have been a coincidence. Someone else renting the cabin, completely unrelated to her. But I knew that wasn't true. Laura handled all the bookings. She would have mentioned it, even casually, if a random guest had rented it twice in such a short time. She always talked about the guests, especially the weird ones. But she hadn't said a word about this. I sat there for a long time, staring at that name, my mind bouncing between rage and disbelief. There was no denying it now. She had been there. Not just once, but twice. And she had gone with someone else. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to steady my breathing. My hands were shaking, not from sadness, but from anger. I needed to see it for myself. I shifted the car into gear and pulled out of the parking lot. I wasn't going home. I wasn't going to sit in that house and pretend like everything was normal. I was going to the cabin. The drive took just under an hour, but it felt longer. I barely registered the passing scenery, too focused on the growing fury in my chest. My thoughts were racing ahead, playing out different scenarios of what I'd find. Maybe I was too late, and the place would be empty. Maybe they'd be there right now, tangled up in the sheets, oblivious to the fact that their secret wasn't a secret anymore. I didn't know which possibility was worse. I pulled onto the gravel driveway, killing my headlights as I approached. The cabin was dark. No car in sight. No signs of life. I exhaled slowly, trying to ease the tension in my shoulders, but it didn't help. Even if they weren't here now, they had been. I stepped out of the car and approached the front door. I had a spare key, of course. I had built the damn place with my own hands. I slid the key into the lock and turned it, the door creaking slightly as it swung open. The moment I stepped inside, I knew. The air smelled different. Not bad, just different. The scent of unfamiliar cologne lingered in the air, mixing with the faint trace of Laura's perfume. I stepped further inside, my eyes scanning the space. The bed was made, but not the way I made it. The sheets were tucked in too tightly, the pillows arranged differently. Someone else had slept here. I moved to the small wooden table near the window. 2 empty wine glasses sat there, next to an open bottle of red. Not the cheap kind we usually bought, but something expensive, something fancy. The kind you bring when you're trying to impress someone. My jaw clenched as I picked up one of the glasses. A faint smudge of lipstick stained the rim. Laura's color. I set the glass down carefully, my mind a storm of emotions. I could hear my own breathing, slow and controlled, but beneath the surface, I was anything but calm. There was nothing left to question. Nothing left to doubt. She had been here. With him. And I was going to make damn sure she knew that I knew. I stood in the cabin's dim light, staring at the glasses on the table, feeling the anger settle into something colder. The rage was still there, but now it had direction. It wasn't just a gut feeling anymore, not just a suspicion built on scraps of conversation overheard in a grocery store. This was real. It was right in front of me, in the wine-stained glass, in the sheets tucked too perfectly, in the faint cologne in the air that sure as hell didn't belong to me. Laura had been here, and she hadn't been alone. I moved through the space, checking for more signs, not even sure what I was looking for, but knowing I wouldn't stop until I found everything. The trash can in the kitchen had a crumpled receipt from a liquor store in town, dated 3 nights ago. A bottle of whiskey, the same wine that sat open on the table, a pack of imported cigarettes. I pulled it out and unfolded it, running my thumb over the ink, my stomach twisting when I saw the signature at the bottom. Not hers. Adam Foster. The name hit harder this time, like a punch instead of a whisper. It was one thing to see it on a reservation, something I could have pretended was a coincidence if I really wanted to lie to myself. But now? Now it was on a receipt for alcohol, bought just down the road, and brought here. I could picture it too clearly, Laura standing next to him at the counter, laughing at something he said, leaning into him just enough to show she was comfortable. I had done that with her 100 times. I knew exactly how it would have looked. I closed my eyes for a second, then forced myself to keep going. There was more. There had to be. I checked the bathroom, saw the second toothbrush resting next to hers, saw the towel still damp on the hook that I hadn't put there. I walked back to the bedroom, pulled open the nightstand drawer, and there it was, a box of condoms. I stood there for a long time, staring down at them, my pulse thudding so loudly in my ears that I barely registered my own breathing. We hadn't used those in years. Laura had an IUD. We never needed them. I took the box and walked back to the table, setting it down next to the wine bottle and glasses. The evidence was all right there, laid out in front of me like pieces of a puzzle I didn't even need to put together. It was already complete. My wife, the woman I had trusted for over a decade, had brought another man to the cabin we had built together, the place where we had celebrated anniversaries, spent winter nights by the fire, made plans for our future. And she had done it without hesitation, without guilt. I pulled out my phone and opened the security app. The cabin had cameras, small ones I had installed years ago, not because I didn't trust Laura, but because I didn't trust strangers who might break in while we were renting it out. She had to know that. She had to remember. Or maybe she had been so caught up in the lie that she hadn't thought about it. I scrolled through the footage, and there it was, the feed from 3 nights ago, showing Laura's car pulling up in the driveway, a second car right behind it. A man got out. I zoomed in. Adam Foster. I didn't recognize him, but it didn't matter. He was tall, dressed well, Looked younger than me, but not by much. He walked around to Laura's side of the car, opened the door for her, and she stepped out, smiling. Not just any smile. The one I used to get, back when things were good. Back when she actually wanted to be around me. I played the footage forward, watched them unload bags, carry them inside, watched as the cabin door closed behind them. I checked the bedroom feed, just a still shot, not video, but enough to tell me everything. The two of them, tangled up in the sheets, her face half buried in his neck. I didn't need to see any more. I exited the app and set the phone down on the table, next to everything else. I took a deep breath, but it didn't help. The weight in my chest wasn't going anywhere. I had the proof. Now I had to decide what to do with it. I sat at the table, staring at everything I had gathered, the wine glasses, the receipt, the box of condoms, the paused security footage on my phone. The proof of Laura's betrayal was sitting right in front of me, but for some reason, it still didn't feel real. I had spent the last 11 years believing that my wife was loyal, that the promises we made actually meant something. Now, it turned out, I had been nothing but a fool. She had taken another man to our cabin, shared our bed with him, and she hadn't even tried to hide it. I ran a hand over my face, trying to steady my thoughts, but my mind was already working through what needed to come next. I had the proof, but knowing the truth wasn't enough. I needed her to know that I knew. I stood up, grabbed my phone, and stepped outside. The night air was cold against my skin, but I barely felt it. I scrolled through my contacts, found Laura's name, and called. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before she picked up. Her voice was casual, like everything was normal. "Hey, are you on your way home?" I stayed silent for a moment, gripping the phone so tightly my hand ached. I could hear the faint sound of the TV in the background, the clinking of a glass. She was probably sitting on the couch, drinking the same wine she had shared with Adam, completely unaware of where I was. "Where are you right now?" I asked. My voice came out calm, too calm, considering the storm raging inside me. Laura hesitated. "Just for a second. Just enough for me to notice." "At home," she said. "Where else would I be?" I let out a slow breath, forcing myself to keep my tone even. "Funny," I said, "because I'm at the cabin right now." The silence that followed was deafening. She didn't say anything at first, but I could hear her breathing shift, could picture the way her body must have tensed. "You're at the cabin?" she repeated, her voice careful now, guarded. "Yeah," I said, looking at the glass still sitting on the table. "Thought I'd come up here and surprise you. You know, since you mentioned wanting to visit again." Another pause. This one longer. Then she let out a nervous laugh, the kind she used when she was trying to cover something up. "Daniel, what are you talking about? I haven't been there in a..." "Don't," I cut in. "Don't lie to me, Laura." "I know." The words hung between us, heavy and final. I could hear her shifting on the other end, could imagine her scrambling to figure out what to say, how to explain this in a way that wouldn't make her look as guilty as she was. What do you think you know?" she finally asked, her voice quieter now. I glanced at the phone screen, where the image of her and Adam in our bed was still paused. My grip tightened. "I know about him," I said. "Adam Foster. I know you brought him here. I know you've been fucking him in our bed, drinking wine with him at our table, acting like this place means nothing to you. I know everything, Laura." Her breath hitched, and for a moment, she didn't say anything at all. When she finally spoke again, her voice was unsteady. "Daniel, you..." "Stop," I said, cutting her off before she could even start with whatever excuse she had prepared. "I don't want to hear it. I just want to know one thing. How long?" She didn't answer. Not at first. I could hear her breathing, fast and uneven, like she was on the verge of panic. She knew she was caught. She knew there was no way out of this. 6 months, she finally whispered. I closed my eyes for a second, letting the number sink in. 6 months. Half a year. Half a goddamn year of sneaking around behind my back, of lying to my face, of pretending that everything between us was fine while she was sleeping with another man. I let out a sharp breath and shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "You know what, Laura? I think we're done here. Daniel, wait." But I didn't wait. I ended the call and dropped my phone onto the table, my entire body shaking with rage. I had my answer. I had everything I needed. Now it was time to decide what came next. I sat in the cabin for what felt like hours, staring at the phone on the table, waiting for it to ring again. It didn't. Laura knew there was nothing she could say to fix this. There were no words that could erase 6 months of betrayal, no excuse she could give that would make me understand. She hadn't just lied. She had built an entirely different life behind my back, slipping away to this cabin with him like it was theirs, like the memories we made here didn't matter. The anger was still there, pulsing through me, but something else settled in too, an emptiness I wasn't ready to face yet. I stood up, grabbed my phone and the box of condoms, and walked to the trash can. I dumped them in without hesitation. I wanted every trace of them gone, but even as I threw them away, I knew it wouldn't change anything. The damage was done. The only thing left to do was make sure Laura felt every ounce of what she had put me through. I wasn't just going to walk away and let her move on like nothing happened. She had taken something from me, and I was going to take something from her. I grabbed my phone and called my lawyer. It was late, but I didn't care. After a few rings, he picked up, his voice groggy. "Daniel," he muttered. "You okay?" "I need you to start the divorce paperwork," I said, my voice steady. There was a pause. Then, "Shit. What happened?" "I'll explain later. Just get it started. I want everything on my side. The house, the accounts, all of it. And I want to make sure she gets nothing." Another pause. Then a sigh. "All right," he said. "Come by my office tomorrow, and we'll go over the details. But if you're serious about this, don't do anything reckless tonight. Just breathe." I didn't respond. I ended the call and sat back down at the table, gripping the edge so hard my knuckles turned white. I had already made up my mind about the divorce, but that wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed her to know what it felt like to lose everything. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Jessica's husband's number. I hesitated for just a second before hitting dial. "Hey, man," he answered, his voice surprised. "What's up? Are you home?" I asked. "Yeah. Why?" "Open the door." I drove straight there, my mind racing with everything I was about to do. Jessica was Laura's closest friend, the one she confided in the most. If anyone knew more details about the affair, it would be her. And if there was one thing I was sure of, it was that Jessica's husband deserved to know just as much as I did. When I pulled into the driveway, he was already at the door, looking confused. I stepped out of the car, holding my phone in my hand. "Daniel," he said, frowning. "What's going on?" I walked up to him and handed him my phone. "Play the video." He looked at me for a second, then down at the screen. I watched his face change as the footage played, watched his expression go from confusion to realization to something much darker. His hands clenched around the phone, his breathing heavy. "You're fucking kidding me," he muttered. "I wish I was," I said. "But that's your wife's best friend right there. And she's been fucking some guy named Adam Foster for 6 months. He didn't say anything. He just stared at the phone, his jaw tight. Then, without warning, he turned and walked inside. I followed. Jessica was in the kitchen, sipping a glass of wine, completely unaware of what was coming. She smiled when she saw me, but the second she looked at her husband's face, the smile disappeared. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting her glass down. He didn't answer. He just tossed my phone onto the counter, the screen still lit with the paused video. Jessica's face drained of color as she took one look at it. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You knew, didn't you?" her husband said, his voice low. "You knew the whole fucking time." Jessica opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked at me, then back at him, then at the video again. Don't. I cut in. "Don't even try to defend her." She swallowed hard, shaking her head. "Daniel, I said don't." I stepped forward, my voice cold. "I don't give a damn what your excuses are. You covered for her. You let this go on. And now you're gonna watch her life fall apart, just like mine did." Jessica's husband didn't say another word. He just turned and walked upstairs, leaving her standing there, staring after him in shock. I didn't wait around to see what happened next. I grabbed my phone and walked out, feeling the smallest bit of satisfaction for the first time that night. Laura's world was about to crumble, and I was just getting started. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers ached. The streets were nearly empty, just the occasional headlights cutting through the darkness. My mind wasn't quiet, though. It was racing, turning over every moment of the past few hours, every word Laura had said, every second of that security footage burned into my memory. The anger was still there, sitting heavy in my chest, but beneath it was something else. Something final. I had done what I needed to do. The papers were in motion, Jessica's husband knew the truth, and Laura was probably sitting in our house right now, panicking over what came next. She deserved worse than that, but for tonight, it was enough. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw the living room lights still on. She was awake, waiting for me. Of course she was. I took my time getting out of the car, shutting the door slowly, walking up to the house like I wasn't in a hurry. When I stepped inside, she was sitting on the couch, her hands gripping a half-empty glass of wine. Her eyes were red, her hair pulled into a messy bun like she'd been running her hands through it all night. She looked up at me the second I walked in, her face a mess of guilt and desperation. "Daniel," she started, her voice raw, but I held up a hand before she could say anything else. "Don't," I said, shutting the door behind me. "I don't want to hear whatever excuse you've come up with." She set the glass down on the coffee table, leaning forward like she thought she could reason her way out of this. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said. "I never meant for it to." I said don't, I repeated, my voice sharp enough to cut her off. "I don't give a damn what you meant to do. You did it. You made the choice, over and over again, for 6 months." Her hands curled into fists on her lap, her shoulders shaking. "I was lonely," she whispered. "I felt like you didn't see me anymore. Like we were just existing." I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. "That's your excuse? You felt ignored, so instead of talking to me like an adult, you decided to sneak off with some asshole and fuck him in our bed." She flinched at the words, her breath hitching. "It wasn't just that," she said, her voice breaking. I don't know what's wrong with me, Daniel. I swear I didn't mean to hurt you." I stared at her for a long moment, feeling nothing but disgust. "You didn't mean to hurt me?" I repeated. "Do you even hear yourself? You think this just happened? You think you tripped and landed in bed with him by accident?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. She could cry all she wanted. It wouldn't change anything. "I was going to end it," she said. "I told him last week that it was over." I scoffed, shaking my head. "Yeah? That before or after the last time you fucked him?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, her face crumbling. She knew she had nothing. No defense, no justification, nothing that would make this better. I waited for her to say something, anything, but she just sat there, silent and shaking. "Doesn't matter," I said. "It's done. I already called my lawyer. The divorce papers are being drawn up." She sucked in a sharp breath, her whole body going still. "Daniel, please," she whispered. "Don't do this. We can fix this." I shook my head. "No, we can't. You broke it, Laura. There's nothing left to fix." She stood up suddenly, stepping toward me, but I backed away before she could touch me. "Please," she said again, her voice desperate now. "I don't want to lose you." "You lost me the second you brought him to our cabin," I said. "The second you let him touch you. The second you lied to my face and acted like nothing was wrong." She covered her mouth with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I watched her for a moment, then turned away, heading for the stairs. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice breaking. I didn't stop walking. "To pack." She cried harder at that, but I didn't look back. I had spent the last 6 months living in a lie, believing in a woman who didn't exist anymore. Whatever love I had for her was gone, buried beneath everything she had done. There was no coming back from this. By tomorrow, I would be gone, and she would have to live with what she had done.